Last time on the Kaiju Apostle podcast. It's almost like he got to second base and just kind of stood there.
Just like me on my dates. Edit that out. I shouldn't have got mustard on my face for you to like me, David. No movie is really just one director's vision, and when it is, you get attacked with clones.
To be fair, I actually don't even know what second base means. So.
I don't either.
Let's find out.
If it's holding hands.
Oh, no. Yeah, no. All right, welcome back to the Kaiju Apostle podcast, the only show where two seminarians discuss and read way too much into kaiju films. My name is David, and joining me as always is Chris.
And someone else.
And we're going to get right into it. Joining us is the one and only Matt Parmley from Kaiju Transmissions. How are you, sir?
Doing great. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Absolutely. Thank you for having technical difficulties, too. We're starting like a half hour late here.
If you know anything about our show, that's like normal for us. So, yeah. I don't know what you guys were expecting.
A bit more than this, but that's all right.
Oh, shoot. Hey, so we're really excited to have him on. We just thought we'd endlessly flame him for 20 minutes before the episode.
Yeah, no, this is just kind of on par for our text conversations, like the E pluribus anus text I sent you the other night. Oh, that was great. But Matt, if you wouldn't mind, assuming that there are some listeners that haven't listened to your podcast yet, because I'll be honest, when I first actually got into the fandom, your show was probably the one that was recommended to me the most. So I know there's a lot of people who know you, but for those who don't, why don't you take some time, introduce yourself, talk about yourself outside of the show too.
So our show started about 4.5 years ago, myself and my co-host Kyle Bird, and we just kind of threw some ideas, and the one that stuck was doing a Godzilla podcast that like introduced people to stuff outside Godzilla. So we talk about horror films, we talk about stuff like Ultraman, which is pretty well known by this point, but we try to go into some of the more obscure tokusatsu and adjacent stuff. It's like we've covered things like not really tokusatsu, like stormtroopers. Oh my god, Starship Troopers, not stormtroopers, Starship Troopers. But like the thing that I love about the show is I'm seeing some of these films for the first time myself. Mm-hmm. I was one of those Godzilla fans that kind of only stuck to Godzilla, and Bird has really forced me to venture outside of that. And so that's kind of the genesis of the show. We've been doing it for 4.5 years. We've done stuff on, we've done panels at G-Fest. We have some really cool things coming up with Kaiju Masterclass, which is an online convention that drops October 2nd. There we go.
Going back
October
in
2nd.
time.
You can tell, like right now, I have dad brain. Got my kid to bed. I came downstairs to join you wonderful guys, and unfortunately, all my like computer went to crap, and I've been frazzled by that. So please bear with me as I fumble through all this stuff. But Kaiju Transmissions is something. The thing about our show is we try to be more informative. We'll talk about history of the show, how it came to be, what it was talking about, what the themes were. And then we'll talk about what we feel about it at the end. We'll kind of rate it on a scale of 1 to 5, and we come up with something stupid like 1 to 5 Minamata diseases, which I'm sure we'll talk about during this episode. So, yeah.
So, remind me, you gave a 5 out of 5 to the anime trilogy?
That is, no, I despise the anime trilogy with like the Fire of 1,000 Suns.
I know.
What did you give
It's
Godzilla
okay.
98?
A step above that. Like if you go look at my letterbox, I think the 3 anime films got like a half, and I think 98 got a 1 star out of 5, probably.
Well, hey.
So they're close. Like you're probably there's like not much of a difference in them. I just dislike the anime that much.
And see, what's so funny is you were so vehemently against them on Alex and Eric's show that I still wanted to be friends with you. Like I hadn't really talked to you at that point, but I'm like, you know what? I don't agree with you at all, but this sounds like someone I need to get to know.
I have never been that bored watching a Godzilla anything. So that's yeah, anyway.
Yeah. So with Kaiju Transmissions, and you said you have something coming up for Kaiju Masterclass. That's what it's called, right?
Yeah, so Kaiju Masterclass is an online convention. Steve Reifel was kind of the one who spearheaded it. If you know who Steve Reifel is, he's the guy that co-authored the Yoshiro Honda biography. And so we're going to have some guests which have not been announced, but will be soon. And it'll be like 3 days from October. I'm looking at my calendar this time. So it's the first weekend in October. So October 2nd, which is the Friday. The big 2-day event will be the 3rd and the 4th, which is the Saturday and Sunday. Mm-hmm. And the idea is to have live panels with Q&A, with having real guests that have actually done work either on the films or know of the films, and to be as informative as possible. And there's some really cool stuff lined up. And those announcements should be going out, like today being September 7th, probably the next week or two, we should have our guest list finalized and be announcing that to the public. So we're really excited to be a part of that. Hopefully we don't have the technical difficulties that we had today, but I'm really stoked to be part of that. It'll be like probably 20 different live panels and live streams on YouTube and maybe Twitch. We're kind of working a couple angles with that, but yeah.
So you're hosting the apologetics for Minya class, right?
No. I am not.
All right, and that's enough for today's show.
He's giving the benediction at least, right? Moist Minya would be blessing the convocation.
I think I would lose, like immediately would be kicked out of the committee to put that thing on, and they would just like unfriend me and block me on Twitter and Facebook.
We've been warned that we would be persecuted for following the Moist High.
That is so true. But really, though, it's weird that Gabra gets more love in this fandom than Minya. I'm like, I think at this point, people are just trying to be contrarian. But anyway, we are excited to have you on, though. I know this wasn't your first choice for a film, but I think having your perspective on this is going to be really, really insightful. But just for everyone who's listening, just give you a brief outline because today is going to be a little different. So we are going to have our typical movie discussion, of course. But then at the end, as we talked about last time, but in case you didn't listen, because we did talk about Space Amoeba, everyone's favorite non-Godzilla film, we do have some audio clips that we're going to play in celebration of our 1-year anniversary, which oddly enough, we actually share with Monsters vs. Men, which I realized that the other day. It's kind of funny.
Ooh, awkward.
Yeah, right. And they're totally the more popular show. And
what did they get us for our anniversary?
I'll tell you in private. And then at the end, we do have a giveaway as well for that anniversary. So
Monsters and Men need not apply.
No, yeah, they're disqualified. All right, so we are discussing Godzilla vs. Hedorah. Growing up, I always pronounced it Hedorah because I had no idea how to pronounce anything. And this movie was released on July 24th, 1971. So we've officially entered the 70s era of Godzilla films. And Matt, if you could go ahead and read the plot poetry.
So I'm terrible at poetry. So you've been warned.
Oh, I'm terrible too. So it's just gonna 2 negatives. It's a positive. We're good.
Smog, pollution, trash in the ocean, breeding ground for Hedorah's destructive commotion, a world steeped in chaos, noise, and unrest, society unaware of how to progress. A doctor and his son seem to have the sole wisdom, while everyone else looks in anger and confusion. But lo and behold, Godzilla appears in the midst of darkness and acid-fueled fears. It takes a few battles and some overdrawn plot for a radioactive hero to reach in and plop, pull out Hedorah's eyes and put an end to its reign. But the next time terror strikes, will Godzilla be hero again or again, you know?
That was really good.
The real Shakespearean flourish.
Yeah, like, why are you talking down on yourself? That was great.
Where's the snaps? Don't you guys do like snaps?
For our viewers at home, we're doing it. You just can't hear it on our mics.
Yeah, they're probably like fast forwarding, like, man, let this guy shut up already.
So staff wise, this is going to be probably the most unique staff we've had so far in our series. So director was Yoshimitsu Banno. The writers was also Banno did the script. Well, so maybe Matt, you can get into that here in a minute. So it was really kind of a joint script between Banno and then it was Takeshi Kimura under his pen name of Mabuchi. Tomoyuki Tanaka was the producer when he was not in the hospital. Music was by Richiro Manabe. Cinematography was Yoichi Manoda. And then special effects was God, I did it again. Last time I had to edit it out. Teruyoshi Nakano. So Matt, I know you kind of had an article that you shared with us. So if you have any insight trivia that you would like to share, I really, like I said, that's the one thing I really do like about your show is, and part of the reason why we don't try to do that is because you guys do get into a lot of the production history stuff that I had no idea about. And I find that you guys distill it down pretty well. So whatever you have to share here.
Yeah, so the article you're referencing was our buddy Patrick Galvan, who's also a part of the Kaiju Masterclass online convention. But in that article, one of the things he talks about is the fact that Bono actually rewrote like the script. So technically, yes, it was a joint effort to write the script, but then he got the first draft and was basically like, this is not what I want. And so he did an interview back in early 2000s, and he basically said that this was my script. I actually rewrote it from the ground up. So a couple just like factoids, like Richiro Manabe, he's actually the best known for his work writing Roman pornography scores. So like that's where people would actually know him. It's outside of Godzilla. He also scored the Bloodthirsty trilogy, which is the 3 Dracula films that Toho put out.
We talked about
those,
that last
by the way, those are fantastic. The another thing is the one thing that gets oft repeated is how much of a banning did he get. So the story goes that Tanaka, the producer for the film, was in the hospital, didn't really see much of the film. And then he once he actually viewed the movie, he was like, you know what, Bono is banned from ever working again. It's not exactly what happened. Yes, it's true that Bono did not actually involve himself in future Godzilla productions, but Tanaka invited him, actually approached him and invited him to be the assistant director on Prophecies of Nostradamus a couple years later in 1974. And of course, somebody banned from the studio would never get that kind of opportunity. So it is true that he didn't work on Godzilla, but also Bono is the reason that we got the Legendary films, because he was given permission by Toho to start his project Godzilla in 3D, which was going to feature a different version of Hedorah. And eventually, though, the rights that he had became the rights that Legendary Pictures got. And that's why we have Legendary Godzilla 2014, Godzilla King of the Monsters, and Godzilla vs. Kong, whenever that eventually gets released. The other thing that I wanted to point out is apparently Hedorah's eyes are also vaginas, which is something that Bono said scared him. I don't know why you'd be scared of vaginas, and I'm sure that's probably not like...
I have a few reasons.
Yeah, maybe. I was going to say the other thing is the sequence where Hedorah's eyes are pulled out by Godzilla. They are, in fact, eyes. They are not eggs. And again, one of those weird things where, like, when you see it in the movie, you're like, that clearly looks like an egg and not an eye. But the director himself has said those are, in fact, eyes. So there's some basic trivia facts. The one thing about this film is it's pulling from real world history. So you have Minamata disease, which I kind of alluded to earlier, which is basically there was a chemical dump in Japan. It got into the fish. Obviously, people eat fish. And people started getting really sick and had like paralysis and death, and it affected children. And you had people that were, women giving, having stillborn, and just all kinds of crazy, awful things. It's pulling real world things from the pollution. There is a couple areas in Japan that actually looked very similar. You can go out and find pictures online in the 1970s. Like there was that much just pollution and sewage and stuff floating in the water that's pulling from real world history. Another sequence in the film that happens as Hedorah's flying over basically some kids in gym class, right? That some schoolgirls that are with their gym teacher. They're exercising and like stretching and all this different stuff. Monster flies over and they all pass out and faint. That is inspired by something else that happened where there was a bunch of kids outside exercising and they passed out from the smog. So again, this movie does a lot with pulling from real world instances and trying to really force that on the audience. I think it does a pretty good job of that overall.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, that's definitely something I want to touch on when we give our initial thoughts on the movie, because I think a lot of that hits on why I do like this movie so much.
You said touch on, which makes me want to circle back to this concept of Roman porn. So is it like
Roman
watching
porno, yeah.
gladiators do it so you can get your crucifix?
Yeah, it's. I mean, there's like the whole thing with like Roman porn. Like it's a whole huge subgenre of movies. And so Manabe is a pretty weird guy. So like people that interact with him, they described him as kind of being like a loner and kind of an oddball. So like doesn't really surprise me that he would score both, you know, Godzilla, but also do the Roman porn stuff. But again, his score, I think for most people it's pretty divisive. Either you love the stuff for Godzilla or you kind of hate it. But I will tell you that of the work that I've seen in other films, like the Bloodthirsty trilogy, the Dracula films, like it's pretty awesome. So
You still didn't answer the question.
what was did I miss the question? Which is
So
highly
like
possible.
what is this? Like, are they like in togas? Like,
Oh, I mean, I wouldn't honestly know. Like Roman porn, it's a subgenre.
That's a trick
The
answer.
other
Good
places
answer.
I've heard the soundtracks, but not the Roman porn.
I heard the Bloodthirsty trilogy.
Uh-huh.
All right.
Hey, man.
Either way, they were sucking.
We are a family-friendly show, so we've already said vagina
Are
a few
we?
times. Let's kind of move on here. Chris, could you go ahead and tackle the poll for us, please?
Pun intended. So this week we asked, now that we've reached the 70s, what is your favorite era of giant monster films in the Showa era? Which I responded the 90s before I realized he said Showa era. So your choices were the 50s, the 60s, or the 70s. And pretty much we got a pretty good response. The 50s were the least favorite era. The 60s came out with just over half of your favorites, and then 70s about 1/3 of the votes. So
it's kind of what I was predicting, even though I'm thinking about the 50s. And I mean, you do have Rodan, you do have the Mysterians, and obviously the original. But I had a feeling that wouldn't be.
Yeah, and we can put like the 2030s when King Kong versus Godzilla finally comes out. But
I'm hoping for video on demand at this point. It's just easier for everybody, and they'll like maybe they'll make more money. Who knows? I'm not sure what the draw is anymore for that movie.
Yeah, we've talked about that a few times, and I mean that's where I'm like, my setup is good enough where I'm like, I would totally be down for it, because especially like if my son wakes up and I have to put him to bed, I'm not at a movie theater, right? I'm at home. I can pause it. I can go do that. Come back. I'm good to go.
Yeah.
But I understand my situation's different than, you know, if you're like 13, 14, you want to go to the theater with your friends, stuff like that. So the Twitter discussion, this has actually become her most popular tweet, which was surprising. So the actual prompt said, it's often said Godzilla vs. Hedorah was so controversial, director Yoshimitsu Banno was not allowed to direct any more Godzilla films. Whether that's actually the case or not, this film is unique to say the least. So does this one work for you, or is it better left unwatched? So tried to keep this a little bit diverse here. David Booth answered, I really enjoy this film, showed the monsters actually thinking, like playing chess. I really like it. Even the part where Godzilla figures his atomic breath would activate the electrode panels. Eric Henry said, it's depressing, dour, weird, and psychedelic. That's a no for me, dog. Rob New from Tokyo Lives says, I think it's a hoot, by golly. Catchy beats, weird visuals, and one of the most interesting kaijus. I love the little cartoon segments, and it's a shame we don't get more Showa with its style. We didn't get more Showa with its style, i.e. extremely 70s. And then Jay St. G said, to sum it up lightly, being critical on Godzilla vs. Hedorah, the main problem is it has an identity crisis. 1 minute it's a kid's movie, 1 minute people are dying from acid mist, next minute it's an acid trip, and the kaiju action pacing is bad. Worst Godzilla movie of the Showa era, hands down. So I think this is kind of where we can take a moment. Chris, if you wouldn't mind, since this is your first time watching it, you know, share your thoughts, and then Matt, I'll have you join in after that.
Yeah, I can see it as a 70s movie. That is kind of funny. It is trippy. But honestly, in the unique way that we're watching the movies, I liked it. It was a nice break from kind of the ones that we've had that were too similar. I could see maybe down the road, if we're done before Jesus comes back or the heat death of the universe, that I could look back on this with a little less appreciation. But I feel like if I was growing up watching these as they come out, I would feel the same way. I'm like, this is a nice change of pace. And it's like a change of pace that didn't require Godzilla to like start dabbing or do the Fortnite dance in the middle.
Is that your
Like-
only example of him doing weird things?
Yeah. It's the way I'm communicating to our Gen Z fans.
Yeah, it used to be Halo and
Okay,
teabagging.
you know, I'm not even like cool enough to know any other dance moves. So we're lucky I'm not talking about like Gangnam
The Carlton?
Style. Yeah.
That's about the only dance move I can pull off, by the way. The
But
Carlton.
Gundam style. The what? The
Oh, God.
Carlton?
Yeah, the Carlton.
Flossing.
I can't do that. I'm not coordinated, man.
Me
Yeah, I'm
neither.
not either.
My body doesn't work that
What
way.
about teach me how to Dougie?
No.
I mean, I'm
I'm
just
white,
saying, these
dude.
are other dances. How do you not know these?
Stanky leg. You could, you know.
Yeah,
Oh, God. And then Ghost Ride the Whip.
Lord. But I don't know. I appreciated the change of pace on this one, and I thought Hedorah was. I appreciated him being a fairly unique monster
Yeah.
compared to some of the other ones.
I mean, that's what's so funny is, I mean, King Ghidorah is technically otherworldly, but this is the first one I think that we get that's like legitimately otherworldly. Like you don't have any point of reference for an animal because he's not at all. So, and as you're going to find, Chris, throughout the rest of throughout the most of the movies in the 70s, that's kind of what we get is we get more of this unique like alien feel to things, which it's refreshing. You know, All Monsters Attack definitely kind of helps set the tone of like, hey, we can do different movies. So I think it probably would have been more jarring going from Destroy All Monsters to this. We already got that black sheep once, and then this is just kind of ramps it up to 11. So I'm glad you enjoyed it, though. I wasn't sure how you were going to feel.
There's something about like I liked when the kaiju were like real animals that are just bigger now, and I thought that was a nice touch. I think there was plenty to say in that. But now
Yeah.
that we're getting to the era of like smog monsters and evil Ultraman, I think if it opens up new avenues and new discussions, go for it.
Ooh, that was a weird burp. Okay, what about you, Matt?
So I have a weird history with this film that I actually want to save for the eschatological conversation, right? Because there's a
Spoilers.
part of me, there's a part of me that hated this movie the first time that I watched it because of the way that I used to believe in specific theology. But now I enjoy it. And it's visually very unique. Definitely the most, in many respects, unique film of the entire series. It has a very specific theme. It tackles that theme, and whether or not you think it does it well may be a different discussion, but it is going after something that has some weight and some substance, and I can appreciate that. I do think that some of my critiques of the film are probably the same as what I had when I first saw it. At least probably half of them were. The battles themselves, the pacing can be a little drawn out. Some of the editing choices are a bit weird. But if you're into art house theater at all, like this is probably something you'd want to check out. May not be for everybody. I'm in my head, I was screaming at Eric Henry. He's somebody who's actually been on our podcast before, and he's a friend. He lives like an hour from me, and I can see exactly why he hates that movie. So love you, Eric. But I enjoy it now. And one of the things that helped me get to over that hump of like, it's okay to like, I actually enjoy it is watching it through my son's eyes, who's 6. I just watched it a couple of days with him again. And it's one that like when he was, maybe I'm a terrible parent, when he was like 3, we would watch this and like, he was totally and completely enthralled with Hedorah, like from start to finish. And it's one of the cool things as a parent to be able to see him feel that way about something.
Yeah, Jasper watched it when he was a little bit younger too. Now he says it is a little too scary for him. But what's funny, today he was like, he wanted to watch a movie and he wanted to watch Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2 again. I'm like, oh no, we're not doing that. So he's like, all right, well, I want to watch a Gamera film, but I want it to be a little scary. So we watched Advent of Legion, and that's the scariest part was the subway scene, which I was kind of concerned about showing him that, but we'll see if he screams in the middle of the night tonight. But yeah, so that's kind of where I'm at, where So I grew up watching this movie, like most of them, at least most of the Showa films, and I've always had a soft spot for it. I've always liked the score. I mean, when the first time I watched it again after years of not seeing it, I mean, it was just like just flashback and just all these memories flooding over when I heard the opening song. Like it's, I think when it comes to his score between this and Megalon, I like this one more. It's more unique. I think the Megalon one's fun, but this one just has more of that 70s flair to it. I think of like, God, what's their name? Let me get, I think it came out in the 70s. Yeah, so, you know, I think of like, it's not necessarily the same, but that song, Hocus Pocus by the band Focus. Are you familiar with that? Did you guys ever watch Baby Driver?
Mm-mm.
I'm ashamed to say I've not seen Baby Driver. It is on my list to like get to maybe someday. I don't,
Yeah.
you know.
No, it's fine. But the song's on there. It's just very psychedelic progressive rock, right? And it just, again, I love that era of music, even if I'm not always listening to it. So anyway, just growing up with it, I've always enjoyed it. Coming back, yeah, there's definitely some parts that I just kind of sit there and I'm diddling around on my phone. But you know, even if I don't agree with people who say this was the most meaningful or the most in spirit of the original, I do think this is probably the message, the film with the most overt messaging, if not to a fault at some points, as we'll kind of get into in a later section. But I do think it's very clear between this and from what I've heard with prophecies of Nostradamus, Bono definitely had an axe to grind against destroying the environment, you know, and the effects of what humans can do to creation. And I think it's a little unfortunate that, similar to the original, there's a very prophetic and very haunting message in this film that we have not learned from and is still as relevant now as it was then.
We have not.
So if anything, I would say it's almost got worse. But, you know, I think that kind of gives us a good transition into our first section, just this idea that, you know, this film was made and released in 1971. And here we are in 2020. And it's something that not only is a issue, but an issue that some people don't seem to care about. It's exhausting to care about it, right? It's exhausting to think that if I go to the store and I even buy a phone or groceries or anything like that, like everything I buy and potentially throw away that's not recyclable, what does that do? I mean, it's this whole laundry list of things of I'm sitting here, I'm like, what can I do? Right? Like, you know, pollution, smog, all of these things are bad, but can any of this change without completely changing our lifestyles and how we live? So I wanted to kind of hear your guys' thoughts on that. Like, did this movie inspire anything in your life, or you just kind of sit there and you feel almost despondent because there doesn't seem to be a solution in this?
I think of like an example that's been in recent memory is like the Flint water crisis here in the States.
Mm-hmm.
So I went there for a business trip like probably 3 or 4 years ago. And like, first of all, you drive through Flint and it is completely and totally dilapidated. Like it's very impoverished. But
Mm-hmm.
to know that they're facing those conditions and that people live that way and then also can't even get like access to clean water, that's an easy thing to fix. And by the way, they've addressed some of that as of late, but it took, people were like moving out, people that could move out were moving out. Some people just basically had to stay there because they had no place to go.
Yeah.
But like to think that we live in the United States and we can't even get access, or like an entire city population can't get access to actual clean water. Like you could light the water on fire. People got lead poisoning, which is awful. That's an example here. And then you think of stuff like the oil pipelines, right, that break and pollute the ocean, or like we displace entire groups of people or indigenous people to land, or like animals that get displaced through that kind of construction. There's a lot of stuff that you can kind of focus on maybe in the big picture. I don't know how much they add up, but like they're real problems and they still happen today. And I think that's what stuck with me about this movie is some of the same kind of stuff is happening now that he was addressing back in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What about you, Chris?
I don't know. I'm thinking of growing up in the 90s. We had a lot of cartoons like Captain Planet, and there's environmentalism is a big theme in quite a few shows today. So it's hard to see. I'm really just trying to think what if anything does the movie contribute that's unique. And back in the 70s, probably there was a lot, because I think it was in the 70s that we really kind of started thinking about individual recycling. But yeah, in terms of like, did this film uniquely make me get despondent or hopeful about the future of pollution? I can't say. It did just kind of get added to the pile in terms of like, oh, another media says I should be better about protecting the environment. Girl, I already know that. Like,
Girls saying
nothing I can do about it.
Yeah.
So
what's interesting, I just pulled this up while you're talking. So talking about, you just mentioned the 70s and kind of the, not necessarily the invention of recycling, but I'm looking at this Time article, and it said what happened in the 60s and 70s wasn't that recycling was invented, but that the reasons for it changed. Rather than recycle in order to get the most out of the materials, Americans began to recycle in order to deal with the massive amounts of waste produced during the second half of the 20th century. So I think you're right. It was kind of that point. It's like, oh crap, what are we doing? You know, we've got all this stuff and we've got to do something about it. But see, that's kind of where I'm at, where I love the movie and I think the message is important. But whereas the original actually produced somewhat of a solution, in my opinion, we know that, you know, nuclear testing is not a good thing. But you can demonstrate that by showing not only what happens, but you can also talk about, you know, this idea of really this laying down of pride, right? Because that's what it really boils down to, is we want to be the most successful nation. We want to be the most powerful nation, all that stuff. But when you understand, you know, what the cost is of your actions and you stop using your own ideas and knowledge for, you know, taking the lives of others. So, you know, there's some kind of practicality in the original, I feel like. This one, obviously, yes, pollution's bad, smog is bad, all of these things are bad. It's our earth is very important, that we need to take care of it. I don't think it's necessarily unable to produce a conversation, because obviously we're talking about it, but the movie does come off as cynical at some points too. It seems like, well, if we don't do this, this will happen again. But then, as others have indicated, the only solution was the embodiment of nuclear testing coming in and defeating it. So I've seen the argument of, you know, maybe this movie, you know, discusses coal energy versus nuclear energy, which I haven't really dove into that, but it just doesn't really seem like there's much of a solution here. I will say it's interesting, though. I know, Matt, you've been watching Neo Ultra Q, going into the Tokyo project, where I love how, obviously, that came out in 2013, so it's not like Hedorah was inspired by that. But seeing what if Hedorah inhaled all of the pollution? Wouldn't we be better off? And what's interesting is, in this film, it made it very clear, well, no, he'd produce the sulfuric acid. But with Neo Ultra Q, it kind of leaves that ambiguity of, well, maybe it would be better. Like, kind of, it is interesting to see that one had a solution and the other didn't. But I think ultimately, the thing that I really wish this would have got into more is the idea of corporation versus individual responsibility, right? You hear about corporations and Twitter brand accounts talking about what you can do better for racism or pollution and all of these things, putting the onus on us. But what about these companies? Like, what are they doing to stop producing pollution? What are they doing to stop racism in the workplace and stuff, right? So, I mean, do you guys feel like, where do you feel like the responsibility was in this film? And how do you guys handle that in your own lives too?
It definitely feels, in the movie, it's placing it on the people and the characters specific, and they have those like protests, like, we're going to get 1 million man march, and end up being like 100 people or whatever. Mm-hmm. It feels very much like they want to organize and they want to make it in mass kind of thing, but they never get there. The onus is never really put on in a movie anyway, any sort of businesses. And the reality is like majority of the stuff that's a lot of the really bad incidents in the world have been done by corporations. Example, I don't know if you guys have heard of any of the Superfund chemical waste sites that are across the U.S. There's like 1,300 of them.
Mm.
The other thing about those is schools ended up being built within like a half mile. Like you're talking about like 1 million students in the United States that are going to schools today. Like this isn't just like a thing in the past. This is a now thing where there were chemical waste sites that haven't been properly cleaned up. And that's linked to like asthma and cancer and learning disorders and all kinds of different things. So the onus in the things that happen that traumatically impact lives are typically done by businesses.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where, and the reality is, we're seeing this a lot with COVID too, by the way. It's always about the economy. How can the economy flourish? People are worried about jobs and things, but they're not thinking about, they kind of put the health on the back burner for the finances. Mm-hmm. Most people can't live paycheck to paycheck, or most people live paycheck to paycheck. They can't go, 3 or 4 months without a job. And so that's on the forefront of their mind, but that allows businesses, the whole system allows businesses to basically do what they want and how they want and get away with it. And only after the fact do businesses get sued, which is what happened in Flint, Michigan, by the way. They actually were sued and they had to pay out several millions of dollars to some of the victims. But those victims still had impact to their lives. They still had kids that they lost. They still had people that were sick. Like you don't change any of that stuff by getting money for it.
Not at all. It almost like it's good that they get it, but it feels like such a slap in the face. It's like, you have the money to pay me now. Why couldn't you have done this before?
Mm-hmm. And I think any parent would say like, okay, you give me money, but my kid died. My kid has a terminal illness now because of you. This money, okay, but like, I want my kid.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. What about you, Chris?
Yeah, even compared to some of the past films, which is the one that we had talked about, like the corporation, like how it was Destroy All Monsters, and talking about like the smog that opens the film, and talking about how the economy had forced the parents to work.
You mean All Monsters Attack?
Or All Monsters Attack, yeah.
Which we agreed that they need to reverse the titles for that, but anyway.
But it's crazy, like this one does kind of put it on us, and I wonder, we are looking at this from 2020, so maybe in 71 we did have this more starry-eyed idealism that it was really on us, like it was our fault if we could fix it. But it does kind of seem like it comes out of left field compared to the pretty stringent critiques of capitalism we've seen in the films previous, that now suddenly it's on us as individuals. Whereas like, so very few films in the Godzilla series so far could you blame on an individual action.
Yeah.
So this one does feel a little different to say, no, this one is us. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's the feeling that I got, that it shifted the blame for probably the first time that I really noticed.
And I don't know if it's necessarily intentional. And again, I think you're right. I think looking at it from where we're at now, where we've realized that, corporations and brands, they have no loyalty, right? I mean, that's anytime I see a Twitter account, I mean, I know it's really just some teenager running the Twitter account, but anytime I see someone going out and promoting some kind of activist, whatever, I mean, it's just whatever benefits them at the time, right? Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's just, I think we've realized that none of these corporations and companies really do care about the people. Well, I would say a lot of us do, not all of us believe that. So yeah, it's hard for me not to watch this film and think, okay, well, yes, you are shutting down some stuff, but whereas in this one, it seemed like it was more on what could people do to defeat Hedorah. We go back to that new Ultra Q episode where everybody cut down on the pollution, right? Which, I mean, you kind of saw the bureaucratic people, they were complaining and, they're trying to find ways to skirt the issue, which I think was very intentional. But I mean, all the industry shut down and it hurt, but it worked, right? So I don't know. I think for me personally, it's hard to look at what is happening with pollution and all that stuff and really find a way forward. Because I think I'm like you, Matt. I've been conditioned in this sense of like, I wasn't raised as an evangelical, but I was conditioned with this idea that, well, eventually the earth is just going to burn up anyway, right? We might as well enjoy what we have now. God has made us stewards of creation, and, we need to utilize these things because, just there's all of these arguments that we make to justify the way that we rape the earth. So you said you've had a lot of history with that. Would you mind sharing that?
Yeah, so I grew up in a very conservative, it was an evangelical church. And like, so anytime somebody broached the idea of environmentalism, it made you a liberal in both your theology and a liberal in your politics, both of which in the evangelical circles made you kind of the enemy. Or at least that's the way that it felt, right? So when you filter film that way, like the first time that I watched this movie, I couldn't get past the environmentalism message to even like watch the movie and just take it in and evaluate it on its own terms. Like, hey, was it coherent? Did it get the message it was trying to get across? Like trying to enjoy it that way, I couldn't get past the message itself. And so because of the way that, and really it was the people that I kind of ran in circles with, and the way it wasn't necessarily even like the pastor per se, as much as like that's just what people thought and that's what they talked about when it came to environmentalism. It goes back to I call it dominion theology. There's probably other words for it, but basically the beginning of Genesis, I think it's like 128, 126, but rule and subdue the earth. And people took that so literal that then that lends itself directly to, well, we're going to support businesses no matter what they do, and no matter how many trees they cut down, and no matter what pollution, and no matter what risk that we have to take to get this pipeline in the ocean. And then they don't care about that stuff. And the reality is that lends itself to chasing money. That's what it is. It's all about profit, chasing money. It's not about the betterment of humans. And I think if you go back to Genesis and you read the creation story, a better way to view that is God creates something and he calls it good. And he does that over and over and over again. And when he gives us the dominion over those things, we should still treat them as good. And we're not doing that right now. We're not taking care of those things. And so I think that's kind of where my head is now. Whereas like before, I had my blinders up because in my head, I was waiting for the end times to happen. And I was waiting for the new creation, the new earth, but everything here presently was going to get burned up. So I was like, why care? Why bother at that point? It was almost fatalistic in nature. Like, it was, but now, like, I mean, I got a son. Like, I have to think about that stuff, right? Because in 50 years, if he can't drink, again, I'm going back to Flint, Michigan, but like if you have a drinking water problem, that's a huge deal, which happens in other countries. Like in other countries, you have to march miles and miles and miles to go to a well that isn't contaminated with something. So it's one of those things where I've completely shifted. And I think, again, a better way to look at it is through the lens of God made everything and it's good. And if he's given us, quote unquote, dominion over it, then we should treat them as good things and not as things to exploit.
Yeah.
Well, there's just something like, talking about dominion in Genesis where God sets this pattern of things that replicate and are fruitful. And then we've taken dominion exactly the opposite way of saying, well, we're done with this tree, so we're stopping it now. Like working it exactly opposite the way God works. So it is interesting.
No, and that's so true, because when we have dominion, it's with a certain standard in mind. So Chris and I were talking about this when you're having some technical difficulties. So I'm reading a book right now called Reading While Black by Esau McCauley, and he's actually a doctoral student for N.T. Wright. So I know we've talked about N.T. Wright a few
N.T.
times.
Wright's the best.
Yeah. So he talks about this idea. His second chapter in the book talks about Romans 13 and policing. And I won't necessarily get into like, not necessarily police, like contemporary police, but the idea of policing and keeping order, stuff like that. And he talks about how a lot of people use Romans 13 to instill this idea that, well, if there are rulers in place, then they're in place by God, which it does say that. But that, but if, this idea that if we shouldn't be afraid if we're innocent, right? So if you do something wrong, then be scared, and talking about how that's used to really to subjugate people, right? So he talks about the Exodus and how when Joseph and his family goes into Egypt, that Pharaoh was a good Pharaoh and Israelites prospered at that point. But then you had the new Pharaoh come in and he subjugated and oppressed those people because he wasn't ruling rightly. And that's when God heard the cries of the people. He used Moses and he destroyed Pharaoh, right? And, the powers that be. So that right there, along with countless other instances in the Bible, shows that when we're given authority and dominion and power, we're supposed to use it responsibly. And creation is no different. Yes, God will come and he will bring heaven to earth and he will make a new creation. But that's not to say that creation now is bad, but it's to be perfected. It's to be put right. And that's just, it's just this weird dynamic or this weird worldview that Christians have. You said fatalistic, that what happens now doesn't matter. Right. And I think that's the kind of mentality that undergirds a lot of abuse in the church, whether it's sexual abuse or just emotional manipulation, because we're so concerned about getting to heaven. We don't care about the backs that we break on the way there. And there's no responsibility taken because, well, the justice that happens now, we shouldn't be worried about that. We should be desiring, true justice comes in the afterlife. And it's like, no, that's not how it works. Jesus came in the contemporary to save humanity, right? It wasn't actually, really, he had saved humanity before the foundations of the world. So really it was done even before that. So, temporality means nothing there. But yeah, it's just, it's crazy how prevalent evangelical thought is with this kind of stuff. Because you can be a non-believer and still have such a disdain towards creation. And I'm not saying it's evangelicals' fault, but like, haven't we influenced this nation enough where it's kind of hard to not be curious, like how much we've influenced it? So what about you, Chris? I mean, is that something you grew up with or?
No, not really at all.
Yeah.
I think the most influential thing of my thought was to go back to N.T. Wright, as we always seem to do, from Surprised by Scripture, when he wrote the essay, Jesus is Coming, Plant a Tree.
Yeah.
Talking about how our work in the current creation does matter to the new creation. Based on 1 Corinthians 16, the work that we do now in the Lord will not be in vain.
Mm-hmm.
So that's been my most thought forming. But in terms of praxis, I mean, I recycle, but beyond that, there's not a lot we can even do at this rate beyond recycling.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like. So I'm like, thanks, Cynthia, right? You've formed my thoughts, but I don't have a lot of praxis to give you until I take over my Fortune 500 company and restructure their recycling process.
Yeah. Well, it's even the fact that like in Kansas City, you can be in certain parts or like within the Kansas City area, not every city and suburb even offers recycling. So it's like that, or you have to pay fees to recycle. Like it's just all these weird things where I'm like, it doesn't make sense to me.
One of the number one reasons I always hear about why we don't recycle is because they're like, well, it costs more. Like, at least in my neck of the woods, they were equating and I don't know how true it is, but what I've heard people say is it costs more money. I'll give you another quick example. I live in the Cincinnati area, and when you drive around here in the Midwest, you have strip malls, which have now been over the past decade, like people just started abandoning those. So now we have like deserted malls and deserted strip malls. And instead of, when companies open a new site, instead of like remodeling an existing one that costs money, they decide to actually build something brand new. And so the old stuff gets abandoned and just completely and totally forgot about. So you've taken down land and trees and resources. And so eventually, if that continues, you're just going to have all these buildings next to each other, and we're just going to keep going down the street to the one that's brand new. And we have resources that we're not actually using properly. And yes, it takes money to allocate those properly. But again, it goes back to people chasing the almighty dollar. Like that's what matters for companies. That's the bottom line of their profit margin is what drives all of their decisions, no matter like what they tell you otherwise, no matter what social activism that they claim. Like it's about money. If there was not money to be made and exploited there, like they wouldn't be doing it. And I think if we were going to have change, it would be there. So
yeah.
Which is, I mean, that's the hard part to be optimistic about any of it, right? You know, because we realize like yes, if every single one of us did something, because, you know, it goes into the conversation about like vegetarianism and veganism, where people talk about, well, if we eat less meat, there's less carbon footprint, stuff like that, which is true. But then it's like, but why isn't the focus put on corporations for what they do? Which I'm not saying there aren't any ethical reasons to be as such. Chris and I know we've talked about that, but I think it just, again, ultimately goes to, you know, the society we live in. You know, we've been conditioned to shoulder so much of this weight and burden on ourselves while the corporations just profit off of it. You know, and before anyone accuses us of being a Marxist podcast, which really wouldn't be the worst thing. You know, I'm like, okay, and that's supposed to be an insult. But I think the one thing that stood out to me the most, and this will be our kind of final section of our discussion here, is I resonated with this movie a lot now, probably more than I did years past, because this movie just captures how debilitating a public crisis can be. So we think about right now, right? We're living, I heard someone refer to it as a post-COVID-19 world. I was kind of bothered by that because, I mean, we're still kind of in the midst of it, but I get what he's saying. Like, it's here, you know, so it's post. But, you know, you have the news segments, right, where there's just so many different views being thrown at you, whether it's, you know, feed it oxygen or stop the industries, right? Which that was brought up as a point, I should clarify. But it's just like, you know, I hear some people talk about how right now with our current political landscape, or even with, you know, COVID-19, which I guess is now the political landscape, they talk about there's so much misinformation. But to me, it's not even misinformation. It's information in general. I think about growing up with the news, how different it felt then compared to now. And I might be romanticizing it. But I feel like I know so much more now on a daily basis than I did then. And it's exhausting. So I think about this movie, and I think about if I was in this film, I would just be sitting there and feeling like I couldn't do anything while this monster is just rampaging through my hometown, and everyone's trying to give an answer on what to do, but it doesn't change the fact that there's still a giant monster killing my friends and family. And I'm being told, well, this might work and this might work. Like, it's paralyzing, right? And I think about right now where my mom is just now recovering from the virus. My coworker, her grandma passed away back in April, and her fiance's mother just passed away last week. You know, just I've numerous people I've seen in my own life get sick and stuff like that, and it's exhausting. And you have, well, so-and-so saying, you know, vaccines are going to be available in October, then other people, you know, it's just, there's just so much, and it's just so much noise, right? There's not really just this clear bell that cuts through. And it's paralyzing and it's exhausting. I mean, did you guys kind of get a similar impression from the film? Like, you know, is that, I don't know if I'm alone in that.
Yeah. I think I'm right there with you, man. We're like, it's the amount of information. I'm going to specifically reference COVID because I think it's the thing that's probably on the forefront of everybody's mind. Mm-hmm. The amount of information available is overwhelming. The amount of conflicting information or conflicting readings of the information, even within the church, is like it's to me, it's pure insanity. I know people that are at risk and I don't want to wear masks. Mm-hmm. And I don't get it. And I know people that are just like, well, let's just accept this. We just need to get back to business as usual. People are going to die. It happens every day. And it's like we've stripped the humanity from it. Like, those are people's, like a grandfather, that's a grandmother, like those are brothers and sisters. There are kids that have died of this now. Like, imagine, I don't know if people just like have lost the ability to have any empathy at all. But like, put yourself in those shoes of like watching your family member suffer with it. Mm-hmm. I have a family member who's been in the hospital with it for 35 days now, and was close to death on a couple occasions, and is doing better now, but still has a long road to recovery. And I just think, like, I don't know why people just don't put themselves like in that position and say, no, I don't want this to happen to other people.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of got off on a tangent there, but like it's overwhelming. And I think the movie does present it well in that way, because everywhere you turn around, even there's one beautiful shot in the film where like there's those, it goes from the city to flowers, and the flowers are beautiful and colorful, and they're super bright, and they're in the forefront of the picture. And then the next shot goes back to the city, and it's just like dark and like dank, not like the memes, but like the nasty thing, and like just like it's, the movie shows that. And eventually, of course, the flowers die, and it does a really good job of overwhelming you with those visuals. So yeah, I don't know if I answered your question or not, but that's
it does. But the thing is, I think, you know, what you're saying there, and I will kind of play devil's advocate here, is it was handled so poorly in the beginning. Like even as of June, the World Health Organization was still saying like, you know, you don't need to wear a mask unless you're showing symptoms or being around
100%.
people
I don't disagree with any of those
who
things.
are sick, right? So like, I know there's a lot of people who are just exhausted by like, who do I even trust, right? And that's where it has become a very politicized element, where it's hard not to think like, okay, well, you know, especially with like the vaccines, like, are they rushing vaccines because someone wants to get a political win? You know, like why are, you know, it's just, there's so many different parts to this machine that are moving that it's hard not to just have no idea what's really happening, because that's kind of where I think being a Christian makes me take a step back and realize that like there's only one person who really does know everything that's what's going on. So whenever I hear someone that's just speaking so definitively and dogmatically, I'm almost turned off a little bit, because I'm like, in a situation like this, like how can you really know what's happening entirely? And that way that we've gone and we've started shaming each other, I mean, it's an effective tool, but I don't think it's good or right the way that we do that.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. The information that came out initially, 100%, was like, it was all over the place and conflicting. I also think that a lot of people are prioritizing their individual desires and wants and quote unquote freedoms over the collective good of other people.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's a big frustration that I have now, because it's so prevalent. But anyway, sorry, Chris probably has something to to add.
Yeah, I don't know if I have anything like on those same levels. But I was looking at like in terms of what does this movie say, and is it cynical, or is it where does it leave us? I'm kind of comparing it right now to two Sentai series, which were kind of pollution based. So you've got Gao Ranger in the early thousands, and then Engine Sentai Go-Onger, which was not, it was in the last decade, I think. And one thing that I've seen across all of Toku is that there's not always great answers, but they're always trying to encourage us in what we can do about it. So none of them say there's the easy answer. None of them say that there's something that we can do that will ultimately solve it. But I do like this way that Japanese Toku writers don't leave us without anything. Like there's still an encouragement to try something. And I feel like even this film, like even in the midst of everything that was getting like spread, there was still a message. There is something you can do, and an encouragement to still be a part of it anyway.
Yeah.
So it doesn't necessarily mean that just because, like, you know, you guys are talking about how little you guys get, we get recycling every week. And it doesn't necessarily mean my carbon footprint's any smaller, but there's something that they're trying to tell us is still worth chasing. Still part of being a human and part of caring for this earth is doing what you can. So in that, I can't see cynicism, even if I don't see easy answers.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's where I was coming at it, where it's like, obviously being in the year 2020, I realized that I mean, I can't say nothing's changed, but it's hard to look back and be like, buddy, I mean, he knew because he just passed away a couple years ago, but it's like the thing that you cared so much about. I mean, not everybody does. Right. And I'm thinking about, Matt, how you talked about growing up and being environmentally minded meant, you know, you were viewed as being heretical, really is what it boiled down to, right? And you think about like how Al Gore, you know, Inconvenient Truth, like I remember never even being exposed to that because, well, he was a filthy Democrat, right? So I never even was exposed to any of that, which now if I read back, I don't know how I'd feel because I've never engaged with it. But I think that just kind of gets into this whole idea where, you know, even still, those on the right are so inclined to be against anything climate based because of what the left has espoused, and vice versa. I mean, there's plenty of things that, you know, the right would lobby for, being, you know, being pro-life or, you know, whatever the case may be, that the left would be largely against just because the right is for it. So it's just kind of weird dogmatics there. But yeah, the movie's interesting. I think the cynicism for me, this is kind of where we'll end, is the messaging almost seems a little mixed because you have Dr. Yano and Ken. You know, they seem like they're the only characters that really know what's going on in the movie. They're the ones that really seem to be giving the right ideas. Whereas, you know, the self-defense forces, they bungle everything. I mean, they literally are saved by Godzilla in this movie. And the youth seem to be portrayed as just drug fueled and unable to organize or do anything, right? I think it was Patrick Galvin's article where he was talking about he liked the ambiguity of the old guys just creeping on the youth. Like, you know, it kind of just, you can interpret that a few ways. And I think he's the one that said something along the lines of like just the older generation watching the youth just, you know, and realizing like there's nothing that they could do. But it did almost seem like Bono was arguing that the youth, or the Woodstock generation, so to speak, made things worse, right? Because they were the ones who attracted Hedorah up to Mount Fuji, whether it was the emissions from their car or the fire. And they're the ones who were thinking, oh, we're going to throw fire at the monster. And it's like, oh, okay. How much peyote did you guys take? But yeah, it's kind of interesting. I didn't really get who he was directing it at. It's kind of, Chris, you know, you and I were talking about, you know, the book we were discussing off the air, where if an author doesn't know the target audience, it's really hard sometimes to understand the book because they're speaking to so many different people. It's kind of like scattershot, right? So I don't know if you guys got that impression either, that it seemed like there wasn't really like I couldn't really tell who Bono was talking to.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, it felt like it was aimed at every individual, but not necessarily like it seemed like it was aimed at the youth, and then like to kill off Yukio pretty unceremoniously. Did you guys laugh as much as I did? Sort of like he dies and he's never mentioned again. Yeah. And by the way, once the camera cuts away from Ken and Miki, they like they don't show them again for like the next half an hour of the movie. It's like they forgot the main characters we were following. And this is to your point about who was the target audience. They, you know, Ken and Mickey and Yukio have kind of been like the main three. And then you kind of had the dad filling in the gaps with expositions and explanations about things. They forget about those three until the very end. They kill off the boyfriend, which is Yukio. And like, nobody says a thing, by the way. He just like dies. And like, so that's one of my frustrations with the film, that I think you're spot on, is like, I'm not sure what Bono is trying to say with that, if anything. It just feels like I'm going to shoot the shot and see where it lands, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. I will say it is interesting that this is the first film that we've really seen death again. I thought that was kind of an interesting element, which as we progress, it'll become more and more common. But yeah, it's just kind of like, oh, yeah, I forget people actually like die in these movies, right? It's not just buildings and cars and stuff like that. I will say, you know, Patrick brought up a really good point of like just how dense Yukio is. The fact that like, it sounds like I'm saying Yu-Gi-Oh.
That's what I thought the first time.
Well, just the fact that like, you know, they realize like at least Hedorah sucks up the cars because of all the emissions. And then they don't even think about like, maybe that would influence, like they go up to Mount Fuji driving cars, like that wouldn't, you know, when everyone else cuts out all of their emissions, the fact that they're like the sole people driving around, like that wouldn't attract him. I don't know. Maybe they just didn't care. Like I said, peyote. I don't know. But anyway, so closing thoughts. I would like to hear from you, Chris, just kind of your takeaway from this and maybe what you're expecting or looking forward to now that we've entered a new era of films.
A minimalist
And I know you've got your very deep theological insights you'd like to share with us too.
Oh gosh. After seeing Eric's comic of one of my first ones, which if you haven't seen that, oh my God, you need to see this. This is a work of art. I'm like sitting here, I'm like, I gotta like plan these now. I gotta get some like but in the end, I'm glad we're getting back on track with stuff to say. Wish we had a little more of that target audience, but after a few that we kind of had said we're not really sure where this is going, we're not sure what's being said, I appreciated it. I think, Matt, you'd called it an art house film earlier, which art house for me is like, I don't always love them. I usually find most art house films boring beyond all compare. But like, hey, if you've got something to say, I'm willing to discuss it. But in terms of expectations, I mean, we're really in, I've said this before, we're getting into like super uncharted territory. I know about Evil Ultraman, and that's about it.
I don't know. I'm assuming you're referring to Jet Jaguar there, but I'm not sure.
Maybe. Why would Evil Ultraman be called Jet Jaguar? See? I don't even. The only reason I even know about Evil Ultraman is because I saw some posters from a tweet from the account. Other than that, I'd be like, I don't know, there's probably Mecha Godzilla coming. Matthew Broderick's on the way. But
oh, bro, does he know what, Chris, do you know what movie's after this one? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I know about the schedule that I check frequently.
So, I'm excited for you to watch the next one because Gigan.
I know what it is, but for the people who are listening that don't, which one's next?
Oh, it's what you're talking about, Gigan, and it's one of those things where, like, if you're not sure what this one is saying, I just can't wait to hear what you think of the next movie for reasons that I can't even talk about because you haven't seen it yet. It makes me sad.
Well, feel free to at me after we record.
All right, Chris, what truth bomb are you ready to drop on us now?
Actually, all I had was something that Matt himself took. And
oh, snap.
We're going to have to edit that out so I can sound like the really smart guy. But man, just talking about that Genesis, it's not about the Dominion. It's about Godzilla and his living breath that activates the way that we live correctly in the world. Just as his atomic breath activated that one thing, God's breath activates us to fight pollution.
I didn't say that, by the way. There's no way I could have said that. There's no way.
Oh man, they just get better. Okay. So like I was talking about, we are celebrating our anniversary with the release of this episode. I'm going to play, as we talked about last time, I invited y'all to share favorite moments of the show, stuff like that. And we got an outpouring of messages. Very excited to share these. There were a few that were not able to be recorded, so I'm going to read those really quick. One of those Chris has already actually touched on. So Eric Schuster had talked about, my favorite serious moment was probably you talking about how Frankenstein's life mattered, even though he was a scary monster in Frankenstein Conquers the World. But Chris talking about Minya killing Hedorah as the son of God, striking down the serpent, is probably my all-time favorite serious or silly moment. That was an S-class joke there.
Yeah.
And then we had Rob, I think it's Shamoy. I don't know. I'm sorry, man. His message was, I'm mainly just happy to find a place where I can think about and talk about both Godzilla and Christianity. It's very refreshing to hear Christian theology that isn't the same old I've heard for years or even harmful interpretations. Asterisk, that's depending on who you ask. I really love the conversations you and Chris have, and it has made me appreciate the Godzilla series a lot more and solidified my love for it. Also, Minya is the best.
Amen.
Yes, amen.
Let's just also plug Rob's Twitter at ya boy Shamoy, because his skill in Microsoft Paint is truly sending me some of the memes that he makes.
It's so good.
It's incredible.
Yeah. But I'm going to go ahead and play these clips. And the first one is from Lisa Nafziger. She didn't introduce herself because she accidentally recorded a video, not thinking that this was a podcast. So, Lisa, thank you.
We're so mean.
That's not mean. She's even told me she'll speak for herself.
So I realized as I'm recording this that you were probably asking for an audio file and not a video. But anyway, you can take the audio from this video. So if I had a favorite moment from the Kaiju Apostle podcast so far, other than the funny banter back and forth between you and Chris and the insight that you offer, I think there are a lot of podcasts out there covering similar material, but what's been really special is to be a part of the Building a Bridge segment, but also listen in from other creators and fans in the community. It's been great to get to know people like Faye, who I've started talking to since I've heard her interview. So I think it's a great way to make what's a really large community feel a lot more close together, and that's something I really appreciate.
Hey guys, this is Eric from Monsters vs. Men podcast. I just wanted to take a second to say happy 1-year anniversary Kaiju Apostle podcast. David and Chris, you have been knocking it out of the park every episode. And though I don't have a specific moment that I'd like to share, I would just like to say the Frankenstein Conquers the World episode featuring Michael, aka Kaiju Groupie, has got to be on the top of my list. Keep doing what you're doing, guys. Thanks for being awesome members of this community, and thanks for being awesome friends.
Hey, this is Jay St. G from Nerd Cage Live, Syracuse, New York, and just want to give my shout out to Chris and David of the Kaiju Apostle podcast. Congratulations on a 1-year anniversary. Cheers to many more. Thank you for sharing your fandom and your faith with us, and hope to meet you guys at G-Fest. And just want to say one of my favorite moments of the Kaiju Apostle podcast, definitely listening to you guys on the Monster Zero episode, especially with the Tetsui rant and how he's the hero. Man, that was something. You guys are very captivating, and I really love the show, so keep up the great work. I'll be listening for years to come.
Faye here. My favorite Kaiju Apostle moment is honestly the entire discussion around the importance of life and the Frankenstein Conquers the World discussion. Congrats on hitting the 1-year anniversary mark.
Well, hello there, Kaiju Apostle. David and Chris, it's Henry, the host, and I just want to say quickly, thank you guys so much for what a wonderful podcast you have done. Even though it is a debunked paleontology department now, I just am really happy with what you guys do, and I will definitely say my most influential episode was your Godzilla vs. Mothra episode. The discussion of Mothra was really good. And David, I'm sorry that I'm already past 20 seconds, but that's how the Henry, the host, do. So keep up the good work, lads. Congrats on 1 year.
Hey, Chris and David, this is Chris of Gargantucast, and I just want to say congrats on your 1-year anniversary. You guys were awesome beacons of positivity within the Kaiju community. And if I have to pick a favorite moment from your guys' show, honestly, your Building Bridges episode just shows, something that's really needed in this community on helping, our fellow fans and make sure that spread positivity, as well as your Gamera Super Monster stuff. That is gold. So congrats on 1-year anniversary. The rest of Gargantucast and Something Ghoulish also wishes you a happy anniversary.
Hello, Kaiju Apostle crew. Chris and David, congratulations on making it 1 year in this crazy Kaiju podcasting world that we live in. This is Andrew. I've been listening for... What was my first episode? I believe it was Hedorah the Three-Headed Monster was one of my first episodes with you guys. And then, of course, going back and kind of getting introduced. And right away, I was really kind of surprised with how intelligent and unique your perspectives are. On top of, being extremely funny when you guys want to be. I had not heard some of your perspectives on the fandom. And I think looking at it through a theological lens has led to a lot of very interesting and fascinating discussions. That and your work with the Building a Bridge has really led to some amazing discoveries for me as far as people go. Anyways, don't want to get too moist and start crying on this, little message. I just want to say congratulations, David and Chris. You two are truly the best.
Hey, David, Chris, it's Jack. Wanted to wish the Kaiju Apostle podcast a happy 1 year. I gotta make it quick. There's a lot of background noise. I apologize for that. But it's been a joy to have you guys on blast when I really need it, and it's been an even greater honor to know you. I think the best part of the show is how nothing's off limits. You guys could be a typical movie review podcast and go through the checklist of, oh, the acting's good, oh, the acting's bad, oh, the effects are good, oh, the effects are bad, but we, the audience, can usually figure that stuff out ourselves. What you guys do is what real film criticism should do, and that's make us think about movies. So whether it be from the themes you find in them or just how we view them in a sort of meta discussion, you guys take us places with these films that I really didn't expect to see, and it's been a lot of fun being on that journey with you. So happy Anna birthday from myself and my team from the Drift Space, and as we encourage on there, always stay strapped. Love you guys.
Hey there guys, Michael here, the Kaiju Groupie. There's a lot that I could say, and there's a whole lot that I want to say about you guys and about your podcast, but I will simply say this: thank you. Thank you for everything that you guys have done for this community. And David, thank you specifically, man, for everything you've done for me. If it was not for you and your Building a Bridge episodes, there probably would not be a Kaiju Groupie podcast. So I will say thank you both for being such fantastic people. It is an honor to know you. Hashtag Harlow forever. And may the great and powerful menu keep you and protect you in the days to come.
So thank you guys so much for that. The reason I did that is just because obviously this is a fun show. And as I've said time and time again, this is really just started as an excuse for me and Chris to have a night every couple weeks to talk and chat and thrust him into this wonderful world. But the show really wouldn't mean anything to us if we weren't actually developing and maintaining these relationships as well. So that's just our way of, sharing what you guys have to say, because, I like I said, I've said it time and time again. This really wouldn't mean anything if we didn't have those relationships with y'all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just been funny to be to come into this and see all of these people start to follow me from worlds that I wouldn't have even imagined, and be able to connect with all of you. And it I'll tell you what, Rob and Eric making memes and comics of things that I said out of my mouth, out of my stupid brain, it's surreal. So those both made my day. And seeing David get canceled in the one meme that Rob made, that was incredible.
Just because I don't like mustard.
Yeah, yeah. But it's been amazing. It's all of these people, I'm saying this because he's on the screen with me right now, but Matt, who I'd have had zero reason to talk with otherwise, it's been really cool to be welcomed in as someone who knows 0% of what I'm talking about and will probably forget each film by the time the next one starts. But to still be able to have good conversations with people who welcomed me in, it's been amazing. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. Is it's to have friendships. So Matt, not just because you're on the screen, but over the past few months, I found myself talking to you more than even some people that I live a couple miles away from. Right. And it's just, I've appreciated the way that we've been able to connect and the way we've been able to just open up to each other in a way that I do struggle with other people as well. And this community really does give us the ability to, yes, bond over our shared interests in these films, but finding people that, really, I could guarantee you, if it wasn't for this fandom, we never would have crossed paths. right? So I am thankful to have those friendships with you and with everyone else because, like I've said numerous times, when crap hit the fan this spring, I didn't have a church to fall back on. I had a couple friends, but like it was really the fandom and the community that stepped it up in a way that I just never could have dreamt possible. So as a way of saying thank you for a year of support, we are giving one person a shirt from our dear friend Lisa Nafziger's web store, whatever design they'd like. So all you have to do is just retweet this episode post on our Twitter and comment with the movie you're looking forward to us discussing the most. And that just has to be done by 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time on September 19th. We will announce the winner sometime on the 20th. Also, since I know we do have listeners that do not use Twitter, just send us an email over at thekaijuapostle@gmail.com with your answer. Speaking of which, do you like the X from Outer Space, Matt?
I do, actually, yeah.
Yeah, she loves that movie. I remember listening to the episode she did with Henry on his show about it, and I tried watching it, and it's a goofy one.
I am probably the only fan ever of the sequel, which is a parody film, but technically a sequel to Monster X Strikes Back.
Yeah, I've heard it's pretty funny.
I thought it was hilarious, but like nobody agrees with me, so
So you're the only fan of this, but you don't like the anime trilogy.
That is correct, and I will take Monster X Strikes Back over the anime every day of the week.
So, Matt, for the people who don't know, where can they find you online, and what else do you have down the pipeline for people to look forward to?
Yep. So you can find us at Facebook under Kaiju Transmissions. We have our Twitter account, KT_podcast. You can email us at kaijutransmissions@gmail.com. As far as things in the pipeline, the biggest thing we have going, again, I'm going to mention Kaiju Masterclass. So that's going to be an online convention. We're going to be announcing some of our guests, and some of them are really awesome. You can actually go to the Kaiju Masterclass website, kaijumasterclass.com. And that is going to take place the weekend of October 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. So that's a Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. The 3rd and the 4th, which are the Saturday and Sunday, are the two big days. We're going to have live panels with real audience Q&A sessions. It's going to be a lot of fun, a lot of crazy information being dispersed. And there's going to be some fun surprises too that I can't really spoil. But yeah, so again, kaijumasterclass.com and KT_podcast for our Twitter.
Absolutely. And I'll make sure to tag all of that in the show notes as well. But Matt, I mean, I really am excited that you did jump on. I know we had talked about another movie, but we wanted to get you on sooner rather than later. And we may break our rule and have you on again. But thank you again for tuning in to the Kaiju Apostle podcast. If you like what you heard, have a comment you'd like to share, or if you want to remind us how we are undercover Marxists, make sure to let us know over at our Twitter page. Our handle is Kaiju Apostle Pod. Should be like Kaiju Comrade Pod. Or you can send us an email at contact@thekaijuapostle.com. You can also follow Chris on Twitter at Chris Worms. That is WERMS. And Chris, you know what I'm going to ask you?
Yep. I finishing up Car Ranger, but the only Power Rangers I still haven't finished is Lightspeed Rescue. So that's kind of been my priority.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll have had all 900 some episodes under my belt, and I can finally go get a girlfriend.
That's all you've been waiting for.
Yeah, just have to watch all Power Rangers before I can start dating.
Lofty goals.
Yeah.
Yeah, man.
Well, that explains why I'm failing so hard.
Well, you're the married one. Yeah, I'll talk about your dad feels, and I'm like, well, today I put some like windshield washer fluid in my car by myself for the first time, so I'm an adult too. Trust me.
But until next time,
may Mothra watch over you, Godzilla power you, and High Priest Moist Minya bring you joy.
Oh, can
Oh
we
my
talk
God.
about Ultraman Z for a minute though?
Yeah.
Wait, Matt, do you watch
Yeah.
it too?
Yeah, you've been watching it, right, Matt?
I'm caught up, yeah. I watched
Yeah.
the newest episode, I think, yesterday with Landon.
Yeah. So I will say, because I remember when you did the MVM Plus episode, Matt, that finally got me to watch is it My Home is Earth? Is that the name of the
Yeah.
episode? God, yeah, that's clear, like definitely one of the best ones from that whole series. And when I watch an episode like this, like I was telling Mallory about it, I'm like, yes, this show does have monsters and fighting, but this is the reminder that like why I loved Ultra Q and why I really did like the tail end of Ultraman, because obviously it does have a lot to say. I wasn't as emotional as people were on Twitter. I think sometimes we type out exaggerated tweets, but that hit a lot harder than I was expecting it to.
That one.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, it wasn't even necessarily the dad part. It was just the fact of like understanding the implications of like, I am now like he associated more with the monster that killed his dad than he did his dad. Right. He was realizing like, oh my God, like I'm not the person that I thought I was. Like that was really tough to watch.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Ultraman Z is again zero substance, and I feel like the older Ultraman shows at least try. They don't always make it. Like I'm really struggling to get through Ultraman H right now. I have like 7 episodes left. But there are some really like solid episodes there. But Return of Ultraman, are you watching that right now? I don't remember how far along you are.
No, I started Ultra 7 and I just am burned out in general, but I got like 5 episodes in and I'm like, this is not my thing.
Yeah, the downside to having 50 episodes is that you're gonna have a good chunk that aren't good. I would say Return of Ultraman like is almost solid from start to finish, honestly.
That's what I've heard.
And it's true. You don't have the highs and the lows of Ultra 7 where like the good episodes are really, really solid and the bad ones are like really, really bad and make you never want to watch it again. But like Ultraman Z, I'm struggling with because like it's again, I think it's because I want something. I know what Ultraman can be, and like as beautiful as the tokusatsu and the effects and everything are, I find almost all of the jokes and the humor to be just like and I'm there for the monsters and that's enough. But like, it's not something that I'm going to gravitate towards.
Yeah. Well, we talked about that last time though, where I'm like, even if you can't give me anything of substance, if the spectacle is there, I'm good with that. Right. Like I am, because I'm not going to expect more, and that's kind of, without trying to color Chris's perspective too much, that's kind of what ruined a lot of the 90s films for me when I watched the Gamera trilogy. Cause I'm like, oh, you could do this. So why weren't they able to do that? Because some of those, like watching Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2, I'm just sitting there. I'm like, oh, this is the perfect Matt movie. But yeah, how did you feel about what's that?
What were you asking?
This is Chris. How did you feel about the episode?
Oh, I like the last one a lot. But I also understand it's a show about like the spectacle and having fun, and compared to the other series that I've seen, it's faster paced, it's more humorous.
Yeah.
It's a nostalgic kind of train ride, and that doesn't land for me. But
this last episode was probably the best or second best. I really like the first episode of Z. This past week's episode was good, but like everything between there was like,
yeah, it's definitely something where I'm like, no one's gonna be thinking, man, how could I like do my master's dissertation on this TV show? But it's fun, and sometimes that's all I want, right? Like with Jasper, he's never bored. He's running around doing his roles, going swatch, all that stuff. Like he loves it, and I'm so excited. I ordered him some Ultraman. It's a Ultraman shirt with, I don't remember who's on there. It's just a little blue shirt with a pocket on there. And then I got an Alien Bolton shirt that's pretty cool. But like
that shirt, rules.
Huh?
Is it like the different colored Boltons?
Yeah, different like walking and different.
Yeah, I have that. It's great. great
Yeah.
series.
Yeah. So like I feel more comfortable letting them watch that than I do some of these older Ultraman series because of how gruesome they can get. And how dark some of them are too. So that's kind of it. I think it for me is if I was just watching it on my own, I don't know if I would care as much, but it's fun. And that's something that I can say about that. And I can't really say about Ultra 7 at the moment, but I think once I finish Neo Ultra Q, which Chris, if you don't watch any of that show, I need you to watch Laundry Day. That is hands down one of the
that's
best
the one you
things.
sent. You sent me the clip from that one, right?
Yes, it's so good.
Okay.
Dude, it's great.
It's so good. Like I was telling you, Matt, like I was just like, where is this going? And then where it ends up is nowhere that I would have expected.
I'm digging Neo Ultra Q a lot. Like every episode has been a winner. Like every one of them.
Absolutely. I really like the one with the model.
Yep.
That was interesting.
Yep.
And that's the thing. Like I think I'm glad with this whole Mill Creek, Toku Renaissance thing that's going on. I'm glad that they did start with Ultra Q because that's what I started with. And still, it's my favorite series. Like it's so
Mine
unique. Too. It's not even that it's like, oh, it's like Twilight Zone, but like you actually get a good amount of depth from the characters. They're like just the way that they interact with these monsters. Like it really goes back to where I felt like with Ishiro Honda, he talked about, the tragic nature of monsters. It's not that they're evil. It's just they're big, they're cumbersome, all these things, right? And that's really what that show plays into, where most of the monsters aren't even evil. They just exist. So, but one of these days, Matt, I'm going to need to talk to you about the anime trilogy without Chris, though.
Chris, did you like it? Hate it?
Haven't seen it.
He hasn't watched it. So
yeah,
from this point on, what movies have you watched? I think just Godzilla 2014, right, Chris?
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah. So he hasn't seen anything else.
I cannot wait for you to see 98, just because of reasons.
Yeah, we have. We're bringing Henry back on for that one. We have it's gonna be fun.
When you watch, you need to go through and rewatch some of the commercials and the advertising for that movie, though, because it was one of the biggest advertising campaigns like ever, which is also why the movie didn't do great. But
yeah, I remember all the Taco Bell stuff.
Oh God, I was at my mom's house the other day, and my grandpa was watching TV. And I saw Matthew Broderick on screen, and I was like, oh, it can't be. And then it turned into Godzilla, and I was like, Grandpa, I'm so sorry, you have to change the channel. He's like, why? And I'm like, do not ask me any more questions. Just change the damn channel.
I'm going to cheat on David. I'm going to Godzilla cheat on David.
Yeah. That's what I was telling
it's the only
Eric,
one he's worried about.
I was telling Eric because he's never watched Kong Skull Island. And they're waiting to do their Kong series till Godzilla vs. Kong comes out. And I was like, man.
He's been waiting for like 4 years.
I know. But that's like, to me, that's my favorite MonsterVerse movie. So it'd kill me. Like, I mean, Chris, you're going to have to wait. But like, I want to hear his thoughts, like, with their show. But yeah, I get why you don't like the trilogy. Like, that's one of those things where I've really tried to discipline myself in understanding why people feel a certain way. Even if I don't agree with you, I understand why. But it's almost like with the Ultraman anime too. I watched the Ultraman anime before I watched any Ultraman. And I got into the Godzilla anime before I really started diving back into the Godzilla films. So I think maybe that had something to do with it. But I don't know. I really like them. But I
like the Ultraman anime.
Yeah.
I ended up enjoying it much more than I thought I would.
Yeah, I remember you telling me that. I'm glad that you did. I think to be honest, I think that's what the movies should have been, is in kind of in that format, but that's neither here nor there. I think it would have played out better instead of just 3 movies.
Well, that was the intention initially. So like,
really? See, I didn't know that.
Yeah. The intention was to have like a serialized show, and then they scrapped that. And I think that's why the issues that I have with it, I think, also exist.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, that makes sense. Oh man,